Hello children. Now we are going to start another topic in the same chapter, sexual reproduction in flowering plants, that is to understand pollination and pollinating agents. So our very first topic is pollination. So let's see what is pollination. Our very first topic, pollination's definition is that it is the transfer transfer It is the transfer of pollen grains. It is the transfer of pollen grains. The very first thing is it is what? It is a transfer of pollen grain. Secondly, the second thing which is important to know, from the anther to the stigma. This is important to know also. So what is pollination, children? The transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. So what is anther? Anther is the male part, or say microsporangium, which produces pollen grains, which are transported from anther to the stigma by the process called pollination. And what does pollen grains comprise of? Pollen grains comprise of male gametes. You all should know that we have read already the three events: pre-fertilization event, fertilization event, and post-fertilization event. So this event is what? Gamete transfer, which comes under pre-fertilization event. So our next thing which we will study about this is that we will study what we are going to study now, the different types of pollinations. Now we are clear with what is pollination. Now we'll study different types of pollination. So types of pollination. Types of pollination. Types of pollination. Types of pollination. So how many kinds of pollination are there? Till now we already read about two kinds of pollination, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. Till now in the smaller classes we had read about self-pollination and cross-pollination. But now we are going to read three different kinds of pollination. That is, one, autogamy. Next, geitonogamy. And next, xenogamy. So these are the three kinds of pollinations. Autogamy is a kind of a self-pollination only. Always remember, children, autogamy is also a kind of a self-pollination. Whereas geitonogamy, it can be self-pollination or cross-pollination. Whereas xenogamy is a typical kind of cross-pollination. How? Let's see. Let me small it up so then we can have space. First is our autogamy, second is geitonogamy, and third is xenogamy. 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 Okay, fine. Now let's see. So what happens in autogamy? In autogamy, if you see, there is one flower, and this is stigma, and this is anther. So in the same flower, the pollen grains transfer from the anther to the stigma. This is autogamy. Whereas in geitonogamy, when plant is there having different flowers, and every flower is having its own anthostigma. And what happens here, if you see, this is anther, this is stigma, this is anther, this is stigma, this is anther, this is anther, this is stigma, this is anther, this is anther. Now what happens? The transfer of pollen grains takes place from the anther to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. Similarly, here it transfers from the anther of one flower to the another flower of the same plant. And similarly, if we see for xenogamy, I hope you all are clear with autogamy and xenogamy. In xenogamy, there is one plant, this is another plant. This is P1 and this is P2. And over here, this is stigma, this is anther, this is anther, this is stigma, this is anther, this is anther. And the transfer of pollen grains takes place from the anther of one plant to the stigma of another plant. Similarly, here, if we see from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another plant. From the anther of one P2 to the stigma of P1. This is what? This is xenogamy. This is xenogamy. And this is a typical kind of cross-pollination. Why you call it cross? Because there are two parents involved. And thus you call it cross-pollination. So I hope you all are clear. Let's move further. Next, variation. If we talk about variation, also what are the major differences between these all pollination types? Very first difference is it is having same flower. It is having same flower. It is having same flower. Whereas geitonogamy is having different flowers. It is same flower. This is different flower. And this is also different flower. Same plant, different plant. Here also same plant. And you got it. This is the major difference between all these. Next difference between all these is that autogamy has no variation. Autogamy has no variation. Whereas geitonogamy has variation or say very little variation. It is also having variation. Who? Xenogamy. Xenogamy is also having variation. Geitonogamy is also having variation. But autogamy not having a single variation. Remember, geitonogamy can have variation or not, or say very negligible variation. So we also say that autogamy is not having variation, geitonogamy also not having variation, whereas xenogamy is having variation. So these are the major differences between all these different types of pollinations. I hope you all are clear with these factors. Let's move further. Now, next comes our next topic, that is different pollinating agents. But before that, we need to study that what is inbreeding depression. In autogamy, there is one characteristic feature that they regularly undergo self-pollination, and because of which they face one problem, that is uh, inbreeding depression. Inbreeding depression, that is a typical problem because of continuous cell pollination. And what is inbreeding depression? It is the loss of vigor by the plants, and it can be reduced by some devices which we call as outbreeding devices. So remember, children, what are outbreeding devices? These are the devices which reduce cell pollination and promotes cross pollination to reduce this problem. Remember, this inbreeding depression, it is a problem which is a kind of a loss of vigor in plants which can be reduced by the outbreeding devices. It can be reduced by the outbreeding devices. Now, what are the outbreeding devices? If I say outbreeding devices, outbreeding devices. Okay, so how many, or say, what are the different types of outbreeding devices? So, very first outbreeding device is self-incompatibility. That is the very first outbreeding device where the plant itself, or it is a kind of a genetic mechanism to reduce self-pollination. Gene-to-gene repulsion means the pollen of the same flower is not accepted by the stigma of the same flower, and thus reducing the self-pollination. And the second is hercogamy. Okay, hercogamy. So what is hercogamy? Hercogamy is the difference between the maturity of the pollen and pistil. Both mature in the different timing so that the cell pollination is prevented. Next is mm, unisexuality. This is another outbreeding device. Unisexuality means the plant itself produces itself produces only pistil or stamen in its flower, so that completely preventing self pollination and promoting cross pollination. And so that there are various outbreeding devices, but these are the major ones. Let's move further, children. One thing I wanted to let you know that in autogamy, if I say autogamy, autogamy, autogamy produces a typical feature. What is that? A typical feature is that they produce two kinds of flowers. They produces two kinds of flowers. And what are those? Those two kinds of flowers are first cleistogamous. Cleistogamous is the first, and second chesmogamous. So what are cleistogamous and chesmogamous flowers? So cleistogamous, they are always closed, remember children, whereas chesmogamous flowers are always open. So these are the two kinds of flowers which are produced by autogamous plants. Cleistogamous closed and chesmogamous open. Cleistogamous plants are or flowers are restricted to self-pollination. They cannot undergo ever cross-pollination, whereas chesmogamous flower can produce or can undergo self-pollination as well as cross-pollination. And what are the examples of such kind of plants, that is oxalis, commelina, etc. These are the examples. These are the examples of such kind of flowers or plants which produce these two kinds of flowers. Always remember. Let's come to the pollinating agents. So, how many pollinating agents are there? So, let's see pollinating agents. Pollinating agents. So, pollinating agents can be of particularly two types. Remember, children. What are those? Let's see. First is abiotic, and next biotic. So, there are two kinds of pollinating agents, abiotic and biotic. What are those? Abiotic and biotic. Okay, so what are the abiotic agents? Wind and water. These are the two kinds of abiotic agents. If we talk about biotic agents, then it can be insects, birds, bees, men, bat, etc. All these are the biotic agents. Always remember, what are abiotic agents? Abiotic agents are what? These are non-living, whereas biotic agents are living. And in all of them, the most dominant uh, pollinating agent is bees. Always remember, children, bees is the most dominant uh, pollinating agent in all of them. Remember, so these are the pollinating agents. Secondly, there are various names given to them like wind. If pollination occurs through wind, we call it anemophily. If we say pollination from water, we say hydrophily. Insects, uh, entomophily. Birds, ornithophily, and so on. Okay, so you just have to remember wind, anemophily, water, hydrophily, insects, entomophily, and rest is not so much important. And last, uh, we need to learn that adaptation in pollinating pollinating plants. So what are the adaptations we see in pollinating plants? So the very first we'll see in wind pollinating plants. In wind pollinating plants, if we see what are the adaptations, if we see in wind pollinated plants, so what are the adaptability of wind pollinated plants? That very firstly, they're having their pollen grains are what? Particularly, always remember their pollen grains are light and non sticky. They are non-sticky. Always remember, children. The very first adaptability in wind pollinated plants is that pollen grains are light and non-sticky. Second, their stigma. Stigma, you all know, the female part is large and feathery. Large and feathery. And particularly, they're having mostly only one ovule. One ovule in each ovary. Okay, children, these are some of the adaptability features of uh, wind pollinated plants. That the pollen grains are light and non-sticky, stigma is large and feathery, one ovule. A very good example of such kind of plants are grasses, corn cob, tassels, corn cob tassels, etc. All these are the examples of such kind of uh, plants. Remember, children, I can show you the figure of such kind of a plant, that is this. This is a very good example of such kind of a plant. If you see, this example of a cob or corn where its stigma is feathery, producing hair-like appearances. These are what? This is what stigma, producing hair-like appearances or feathery stigma. That's it. Such kind of a plant undergoes wind pollination. So our next plant is water pollinating, water pollinated plant. So what about this now? Water pollinated plant. So what are the adaptability of a water pollinated plant? The very first adaptability is that that its pollen grains are long and ribbon shaped. Ribbon shaped. This is the one characteristic feature. Second, they are coated by a mucilaginous coating. Mucilaginous coating. So these are the characteristic features of a water pollinated plant, that their pollen grains are long and ribbon shaped. They are coated by a mucilaginous coating. What is a mucilaginous coating? It is a kind of coating which protects the pollen grains from desiccation by wetting. Okay, a very good example of such kind of plants is Vallisneria. Vallisneria is a very good example of such kind of a plant. I can show you the image of it so that it will be more clear to you all. Yeah, this one. So you all can see there's a figure of a Vallisneria. If you all can see, there's a big, you can see long thread-like appearances, ribbon-shaped structures. These are the pollen grains of such kind of a plant. And this is Vallisneria. That's it. Let's come to the last pollinated plants, that is insect pollinated plant. So in insect pollinated plants, what are the adaptability of an insect pollinated plant? Let's see. The very first characteristic of such kind of a plant is their PG or pollen grain is what? Is small and sticky. It is sticky. Their pollen grain is small and sticky. Secondly, stigma, the female part, is large, colorful, fragrant, and full of nectar. So this is the second feature. That pollen grain is small and sticky. Stigma is large, colorful, fragrant, and full of nectar. So these are the characteristic features of an insect pollinated plant. Remember, insect pollinated plant is colorful. It can be easily attracted by the insects, and it is colorful. Why? To attract the insects. Secondly, it is having nectar, which will help the insects to get attracted towards the plants, and plants will be helped by undergoing pollination with the help of insects. Particularly, its examples are very easy. For example, what are the insects? You can know bees. Bees are the very good example of such kind of insects, which are usually wasps, butterfly, etc. These are some kind of insects which undergo or help in pollination. I can show you the examples or say the figure of one plant. It will help you out to understand it more. Can you see the flower is so colorful and attractive, which attracts the bees towards them, and thus they get attracted and the nectar can be taken by them. Bees, usually I told you previously that bees are the most dominant uh, pollinating agents because they need to make honey from the nectar, and this is how the pollination occurs in such kind of plants. And lastly, we're going to study about our last topic is what are the advantages. What are the advantages? Advantages, or you can say floral rewards. What are the floral rewards? Floral rewards. Okay, what are the floral rewards? Floral reward means like insects help the plants to undergo pollination, and how come in return plants help insects? Some of the plants, like some of the flowers, like for example Amorphophallus, it is such kind of a big flowers that it can also help the insects to lay their eggs in it. For example, a very good example of such kind of a flower is Amorphophallus. Amorphophallus is a very good example of such kind of a flower which undergoes or help the insects to lay their eggs. And another example is um, yucca plant and moth. Yucca plant and moth. This is also another example of floral rewards, where in yucca plant the moth can lay their eggs, and in return yucca plant gets pollinated. Such kind of floral rewards comes under this condition, and this is also called as mutualism, where both are benefited. I can show you the image of Amorphophallus, but you can see it clearly that how it occurs. You all can see Amorphophallus is such a big, huge flower which can help an insect to lay their eggs. Secondly, I'll show you the yucca plant having moth's eggs. This is a yucca flower and moth is appearing in it. You all can see here, and it lays its eggs inside it. And thus, this kind of a condition is mutualism, where yucca plant gets benefited by undergoing pollination and moth is benefited by laying its eggs. And these are kind of an examples of floral rewards. That's it for today, children. And I'm going to give you an assignment which you have to complete. You have to solve the questions, and which topics are not covered till now, just leave those questions. So, uh, these are the important questions which you have to solve up and then show me up. You can take the screenshot of this page. Okay, children.